Okay, so if everybody keep your mics muted except for the panelists, and we'll get started here. So welcome to today's panel discussion entitled After the Pitch. There's a lot of preparation focused on getting entrepreneurs to that first investor pitch, but then what? To provide real-world insight on this, we brought together some key players who were involved in multiple rounds of fundraising for OnLume. OnLume is a medical device startup with a novel imaging system for fluorescence-guided surgery. And just a few months ago, the company announced the completion of a Series A funding round in which it raised over $7 million to assist in its plans for commercial launch. Our panelists today are Adam Usselman of OnLume, co-founder, president, and CTO, Jim Bowman, OnLume CEO, and Andrea Dlugos, Wisconsin Investment Partners. She's co-manager. And before we get started with the conversation, I'll give a brief overview of OnLume's funding timeline to set the stage. And so the Madison Company was started in 2015 with $50,000 in founder investment. And the following year, it received $300,000 in grant funding from the federal SBIR program, National Cancer Institute to be more specific, and $75,000 in state matching funds from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and CTC. And then in around 2018, 2019, the company raised about $1.6 million in seed funding from multiple sources, including Wisconsin Investment Partners. And as previously mentioned, the $7 million Series A raise was announced in 2021, just a few months ago. And that's a real simple overview, and more details about this will come out in our discussion. And so let's start with a brief introduction from each of the panelists. Briefly tell us about your role at each of your organizations and how you factor into this picture and this timeline. And we'll start with Adam.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks much for inviting us to be on the panel today, Brian. As Brian mentioned, I'm Adam Usselman. I'm the CTO, president, and co-founder of OnLume. And I started the company with 4 other founders in early 2015, shortly after finishing my PhD in medical physics at UW-Madison, where I also earned my master's degree in medical physics and a bachelor's degree in nuclear engineering. So I'm a triple badger. And we worked on the company nights and weekends while I did a postdoc at the medical engineering lab at the Morgridge Institute for Research before starting full-time at the company in July of 2016 after we received our phase 1 SBIR grant. And following that, I served as CEO up until a year ago today when we brought in Jim Bowman to serve as the CEO as we ramped up our commercialization and Series A funding efforts. So this is a good segue to Jim, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Adam. Yeah, it's been exactly a year ago today, and what a fun year it's been joining this team. Jim Bowman, I'm CEO, and came into this great group that achieved really great progress with a relatively small amount of capital. And I think we have an interesting story to tell on that whole path leading to 2020 and then leading to a really interesting financing recruitment. The initial close happened before the end of 2020, but yeah, my immediate role was to put the pieces of the business plan and the financing plan together with Adam and to start executing on that financing plan. And we'll get into the details, but great to be with you today.
And Andrea.
Thanks for including me today. Happy to be here. I'm one of the co-managers of Wisconsin Investment Partners, Wisconsin's probably oldest and most active angel investing network. We have about 80 active investors as part of our network, each of whom make their own investment decisions. We pool our funds together to make investments in early stage companies. As a co-manager, I help coordinate the deal flow for the investment opportunities for our members and communications between our members and the portfolio companies. And then also schedule the meetings during which we evaluate, we pull our expertise to evaluate, mentor, and invest in the companies that we meet with. And we're excited that OnLume is part of WIP's portfolio.
Okay, great. Thanks for those introductions. And so Adam, we're going to start with you. So you were there from the beginning. In the early years, you worked on developing the technology and started thinking about your business model. When did you know it was time to start raising the first round of capital? And what were the triggers? And what were the milestones you were trying to fund?
Sure. So we started really focusing on fundraising not long after getting the SBIR grant. We had developed the technology to the point where we knew that we wanted to start pursuing the regulatory pathway that would be required and invest more heavily in the development of the project after we had some initial success. So, but we started the process really early. So in 2015, we did the governor's business plan competition. And ended up taking second in the life sciences division of that competition. That was sort of a first introduction of the company into sort of the area, the local sort of investor and entrepreneurial landscape. So we started conversations with investors and the community pretty early, even though we weren't really pushing for funding until a bit later on in the process.
Okay, and how did you go about finding and talking with them at the beginning, and how did you feel about the process at that time? How comfortable were you with it?
Sure. So we worked through a few different channels. We have an experience board of co-founders that includes Rock Mackey, who's a serial entrepreneur and medical device expert that a lot of folks in the community know, and he's got a really great network of investors in the area and elsewhere. So we worked through networks, and we also after that governor's business plan competition, I was attending all of the Wisconsin Technology Council's events like the Early Stage Symposium and the Entrepreneurs Conference, and made a point of networking at those events to meet investors, attend panels, and learn more about their opinions on startups and how to talk with and communicate with investors. So and in terms of how it felt, as coming out of grad school, I was very experienced in doing technical presentations, and it was a bit of a shift to start doing investor pitches, and but there were a number of opportunities for coaching along the way through some of the pitch competitions, and also when after we started talking with Wisconsin investment partners, Andrea, as well as some other WIP co-managers, including Janet Lowy, helped sort of give feedback on the pitch and hone sort of the level of detail of the technical side and the financial side that investors were looking for, and that was really helpful for really honing the message and the pitch in those early days.
And Andrea, so WIP was among the investors in that seed round. Tell us about your early interactions with Adam and OnLume.
Sure. As Adam said, he was introduced to WIP through Rock Mackey, who is a WIP member, and then also another one of his colleagues, Ray Riddle, is a WIP member. So we sort of got double teamed introducing Adam to WIP. And immediately, I think I felt Adam's sincerity in his approach to talking to us. As he mentioned also, one of the things that we work on with some of our companies is how to balance providing investors with technical details of their product and convincing us that, they have something that makes sense, with also sort of the business aspects of it, which, I like to call the investory side of things. And so I think that it's a really, it takes a little work to get a good balance of that. And in a group like WIP, we have some really smart people who have that technical expertise and ability to get people like Adam way down into the weeds. And then the rest of us are sitting there, twiddling our thumbs. And so we all have to work together as a team to kind of pull up out of the weeds and provide a more broad perspective when we're talking to when you're talking to investors. But back to, OnLume, we felt that when they came to us early, they had really a good plan already in place of how to get through their FDA clearance, how to initiate commercial rollout. And so we just had a pretty good confidence level in their team and the creative and innovativeness of their product.
And once they did that initial pitch, what were the next steps?
WIP goes through a relatively standard process. We have the initial, introduction, which really helps having a warm introduction from somebody that you trust. Then we put companies through a screening meeting, which includes a number of our more active members. And then sort of depending on where we think the company is at that point, are they ready to go to an investor presentation? Do we think their terms of their round are appropriate and would be appealing? What do we think of their deck? What do we think of their presentation? And we might do some mentoring in between. And then once they present at our general meeting, we get a gauge from our members who are in attendance about whether they'd be interested in investing. WIP has a minimum initial investment amount for a new portfolio company of $100,000. So we try to, make sure that we're going to hit close to that number at the meeting. And then we put together a call to invest package. During that time, it's sort of, we don't call it due diligence, but it's in that vein where we accumulate information from the entrepreneurs based on questions and requests that we get from our members. And then we put together a packet that we put out to all of our members and ask for commitments for the investment. That takes, so our screening meetings we have monthly, and then we have the investment meetings every other month. I'm not sure if that was the schedule we were on back then. For a while, we were doing both monthly. And then after the general meeting, we have the call to invest package. Usually that takes a couple, few weeks to put out. And so you're really looking at, at least a couple months timeline, depending, if everything goes smoothly.
And you mentioned the strength of their plan coming in. What were there any other factors that motivated WIP to go ahead and invest in OnLume?
I really think that it was the innovativeness of the product, but also that they had a really strong team. We felt that from a technological standpoint, they had a good, strength there. They had someone involved in regulatory aspects of the business to help them walk through the regulatory clearance. And then they had folks that were really ready to help get boots on the ground running for commercialization as well.
And so Adam, now pick back up here. So you basically received follow-on questions and assignments from Andrea and WIP. What kinds of things did you have to? What kinds of information were they looking for, and how much time did you have to get it? Were you ready for it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as Andrea alluded to earlier, the membership of WIP is very diverse in terms of background. So when she would consolidate the questions and send them to us, there was a range of things from very technically detailed questions to questions about specifics of commercial rollout or the financial pro forma. So it was a breadth of questions that came through, and we were generally prepared for those questions. There were things that we had thought about, and we anytime an investor comes back with questions, it should go to the top of the priority queue for everybody involved. So we would generally respond within a day or two with detailed responses, and on our end I would draft up the initial responses and then pull in feedback from people that say regulatory, if there was a regulatory question, and would have Rock look over some of the responses occasionally as well, to just make sure we were on the same page with everything. And but we really prioritize those responses. But yeah, I wouldn't say we had to rush. It was just something that we prioritized.
And Andrea, So assuming there's a match, and it's kind of a general question, or assuming there's a match and a decision to fund, how long should entrepreneurs expect to get the actual money?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was a usual answer. It does. I mean, the ideal time frame that I presented before of a couple, 2 to 2.5 months is, best case scenario from our standpoint, I think. Sometimes we get companies that say, oh, we have a term sheet and we have this much of our round filled, and, we're going to close, the round before your next general meeting. And if we really think that our members are going to be interested in investing, we'll do off-schedule meetings. My experience is that most of the time that ends up being unnecessary, that the round actually doesn't close in that time frame. And the off-schedule meetings are difficult to really make work because you don't end up getting your, our members are used to meeting on the schedule, and we don't necessarily get all the participation that we would like to get at an off-schedule meeting. So it isn't the most ideal situation. We've sometimes made investments on, those special meetings, but more often it hasn't really worked out. So our preference is to stick with our schedule. And then there's just, plan for the worst, honestly, because there's so many things that can derail an investment process or slow it down. You've got lawyers involved, you've got, people funding, you got people making, changing their minds, I suppose, working out some of the details. So it can be anything.
And once a company's in your portfolio, what does the relationship with that company look like from your end?
We try to take mostly a hands-off approach. I mean, we don't want to be consuming entrepreneurs' time with answering investor questions. From our standpoint as an angel network, we have a single point of contact with the company. So we don't have each of our members who might have participated in the round go directly to the company. So it's just really one person. We like the company to put something out to us on a regular basis. That's ideal. If they have a quarterly shareholder update that kind of covers all the points that all of their investors are interested in hearing, that's really ideal. Because again, we don't really want to interrupt the course of their business answering, investor questions. So we do that. We expect, like to get some kind of quarterly update, and then we actually put out a survey on an annual basis to our portfolio companies. I guess I'll say one other thing is if we have a sizable enough investment that we've led the round, and it's of a size to warrant it, we might get a board seat or a board observer seat, in which case, of course, we would have correspondingly more contact with the company.
And Adam, how did it look like from your perspective once the relationship started? How did your life change with that relationship?
Sure. So we after WIP invested, we started doing more regular investor updates, quarterly updates in a newsletter format. Actually, Andrea recommended a format that we use for that, and that was kind of a touch point for any questions or from our end, any requests for help that the WIP membership might be able to provide with the company's needs at the time, and I think that was really helpful to make sure that there was a clear communication through through the company's progress, and I think one thing that is really important in communicating to investors is to be open with challenges as they arise, because I think it's better to disclose sooner rather than later. For example, when we were pursuing our FDA clearance, we actually submitted our 510K in the midst of a government shutdown. So FDA was still working off of user fees, but the people that were processing user fees were furloughed, so they couldn't process our user fee to get started on the 510K. So we lost several months due to that process. But we made a point of communicating it and explaining the situation, because things don't always go as expected, and it's I think investors understand that, and so it's important to communicate when those things arise. And then in addition to the quarterly updates, we also had annual reporting that we would provide details of company performance and so forth over the preceding year.
And Andrea, how did that land with you and Whip with the changes that example that Adam just gave about changes with the regulation timeline?
I guess it's not new to us, right? We've invested in biotech companies before. I think that it was possibly on our radar that they were a little aggressive and optimistic, let's say, optimistic in the timeline that they had presented. So from our standpoint, I think it was less a surprise than maybe others for others.
Okay. So Adam, now we're going to fast forward to 2020, and you've brought things along. You brought the technology along. You kind of understand the business model more. You've had the grant and investor funds. And so when did you know it was time to go for the next round of capital? What were the triggers? What kind of milestones were you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so we've been very capital efficient through the process, and had a small team that wore a lot of hats and really went above and beyond to get the technology to the point where we had a design for a product that was commercializable. We had relationships with contract manufacturers queued up and in place, and we reached a point where what really was needed to sort of turn the crank was additional funding to start making purchase orders and hiring additional staff. So we were capital efficient for as long as we could, and then we just reached a point where cash was absolutely necessary. So
and how did the company set itself up to, and in this new round, how did the company set itself up to increase its chances of success in raising this larger amount of money?
Yeah, so we tried to get all of the operational pieces in place as much as possible, those relationships with contract manufacturers and so forth, our supply chain. And as we looked towards the next set of challenges for the company in terms of raising Series A funding and building a commercial sales team and going through the process of a commercial launch, we look to bring in a CEO. So we rather than have me sort of learn how to go through that process, or it's in terms of looking at the being pragmatic about maximizing the probability of success for the company, de-risking commercial execution, and really sort of thinking about the long-term enterprise value of the company. It made sense to bring in somebody with commercial expertise and who'd been there before. So we brought in Jim, and it's worked out really well.
Okay, and so basically you took a new role at the time Jim came in, and you said you were basically pragmatic about it.
Yeah, I think that as sort of the operations, thinking about how the operations would grow, I feel great about it because I get to spend more time on where where my background lies, spending more time with the technology. And I'm very involved with many operational aspects of the company that are important, but I'm able to devote more time to the things where I can add the most value, and I think that's important. It was an important realization, is that I can add more value by spending time on those things rather than some of the duties that I was kind of learning along the way. yeah, I feel great about it. And through the process, we were very, what helped is that we were very thorough in our search for the candidate, and we interviewed yeah, several different people, and had many stages. It was a several month process to find and vet candidates, and yeah, we're delighted with how things played out. It's bringing Jim on board, and it's led to our successful Series A and great things in the years ahead.
All right, that's a good segue to you, Jim. Then this is where you come in. And how did OnLume find you and attract you? And what did you need to know about OnLume and its team before you signed on?
Yeah, I'm delighted also. I couldn't be more thrilled to be with this team. And they came on my radar and vice versa through a mutual contact that is a prominent executive recruiter in the field of med tech and biotech. And this person has based in California, but has some good Wisconsin roots, as well as connection to our chairman, and has done work in the past with Rock Mackey. And so that's how we got connected. And immediately it was really clear that this was something special. I've spent most of my life in med tech and with new innovations in surgical technology. So what was attractive to me was this was a very clear market need with which this team, with relatively little capital, had come up with a very good solution, technology solution, and taken that technology through proof of concept and proof of principle, and all the way through to 510(k) clearance with about $1.9 million worth of money. And that just doesn't happen in surgical technology, especially with new innovations that are aimed at again, a very clear market need. So a wonderful team that did great things, and in an industry which I think is still in its infancy, and is going to be in a very exciting 5 or 10 years here. So very attracted to that whole package. And again, kudos to Adam and his team for what they teed up leading into 2020.
Okay, and then when you got there, how did that strategy come together for raising the Series A funds? I know there's kind of more to the story, kind of just before you got there, or a little before you got there, and then after. So what was the strategy and the process like?
Yeah, so really a great process in the fact that when I joined in June of last year, just before then, the board had approved a convertible note for $1 million to put us on the path of putting a whole plan together to tee up a Series A recruitment. And about a quarter of that note program had been raised. So the immediate thing is to come on board and start putting the business plan, the financing plan together with Adam and the rest of the team, and recruit the rest of that note and start all the networking and nurturing of the relationships. And first we aimed at some people we knew, both of us independently, people in my past life that were part of different funds or part of different VCs, and Adam from some of the contacts he had. And we used that period to vet our plan. And that was very productive, including with people like Andrea and the people at WIP, to make sure we're continuing to improve the entire plan. And through that process, we were able to recruit the rest of that note. In fact, we oversubscribed that in Q3 of last year. And all along the way, in parallel, we're putting together the pieces of the puzzle for the Series A recruitment, which we wanted to start, as soon as possible in Q4. Yeah, so a couple things have to happen during all that planning. You have to look at not only the business plan, but also the technology plan and roadmap, and then separately, but all tied together is the financing plan. That financing plan for Series A included a lot of review about what level of funding that we could be looking at raising, and from who, what profile of investors. We felt very comfortable that we wanted to raise enough for the 18 to 24 months, traditionally the range that you want in Series A to get a technology to commercial launch. And that turned out to be another $6 million on top of the the convertible note. And that was a good sweet spot. You don't want to raise 5 years worth of money during Series A, and you don't want to raise too little amount of money, not hitting the appropriate milestones during Series A. So we put the plan together, including tying the funding to specific milestones. And to support all that, it was very critical to have the data room put together. So that is a lot of work. You want to put thoroughness in all that, everything in the data room to support your story. And also all those things you don't expect to get challenged on, have those done also in your back pocket, because investors will dig deep in some topics and you want to be prepared. And I think we did a very good job on that. We got a lot of compliments about that in the early days of getting some of the investor candidates in, and that gave us confidence to continue going with our plan. And the plan was specifically for the milestones attached to the money that we were raising. So that led to an interesting pathway. After we closed the note, we were continuing to nurture those contacts while in parallel digging up lots of other contacts of many different profiles of investors. And Adam and Christy's on the line here, one of our executive management team. And the three of us were involved in all of the presentations. And from those, we had a good 1-2 punch or 1-2-3 punch as far as covering all the topics with thoroughness, and took advantage of any presentation we possibly could. We garnered all the questions that came back, and we accumulated all those responses and put those responses in the data room. The moral of that story, I think, is really important in that you really have to have all your due diligence material done up front, and be very thorough, because people are going to dig in deep in some of these topics, and you have to be ready. So we had a virtual data room set up for after the presentations to take them to the next step. Again, interesting things happened after we closed the note, and while we were nurturing all these investment candidates, many who did not get in the note were still interested. And we were, as we're uncovering all of our investment candidates and nurturing the ones we were already in contact with, we got to the point where we thought, with those that are on the hook, it almost comes to the 6 million that we were going to be looking to raise during this round. So we went to the board in late Q3, early Q4, and with the batch of targets that we thought we had on the hook, the next step was to discuss with the board, is this an appropriate profile of investors to bring into the company, and what valuation is the board going to be comfortable with? And I would summarize that batch of investor candidates as family offices, family trusts, angel groups, and other high net worth angel type folks. But the family office profile has always been attractive to me. They love to invest in healthcare technologies, and usually are very good partners in the company, very good investors in the company. So as we had this, we went to the board and said, well, we've got what we think is we can raise, and here's a range of valuation we think we can do it at, and not dissimilar to what had been postulated by the board and Adam in the early days. So we were close, and so we went on October 10th. We got board approval to proceed down that line. We didn't stop any of our parallel activities, including outreach to venture capital firms that are commonly investing in early stage healthcare companies. However, lo and behold, on October 10th, when we got the approval from the board, we went through, and 2.5 months later, we closed our initial close with that group, not losing one of those investors. And with the convertible note, it totaled up to about $7 million. So in the midst of the pandemic, after officially launching our story for Series A, the day before Christmas Eve, we were able to close 90% of that funding. So really a great accomplishment. And again, the fact that we had such a great team in place allowed us to have all of our ducks in a row, having our story resonate. And with that initial close at the end of December, customarily you have 90 days to finish that off, and we finished that off with a couple more prominent people, prominent groups to come in, and so we ended up closing that at the end of March, and we're very pleased. In the midst of the pandemic, you didn't see very many Series A stage companies completing their Series A funding, so we were really pleased. Going back a little bit, another feather in the cap to Christy and Adam and the whole team is they did such a great job with the phase 1 grant that Brian mentioned. They put together the phase 2 grant on the heels of that. And in September of last year, we were informed of the award of the phase 2 grant, and it was very substantial. All phase 2 grants are really fantastic. This was for $2 million over a 2-year period. So it almost matches exactly the calendar with which the Series A funds would be spent. So that was really just icing on the cake, and it really helped our recruitment of the Series A that we got that notification, and immediate execution of that grant started in October of last year. So those things pieced together very nicely. There's one last other item I wanted to add in. I think that's useful for everybody, in that the state of Wisconsin has a really good program called the Qualified New Business Venture Program, put out by the Wisconsin Economic Development Council. And this is a really important tax benefit program for people that invest in, again, qualified new business ventures. There are some criteria that you have to research, but I think everyone on this call should spend some time to understand that program, because it did have an effect on our recruitment and the speed with which we were able to close that initial close. Just in summary, what the investors get when they invest in these qualified new businesses is they get 25% tax credit on what they invest in the company. So that has it's very attractive. It was very attractive to all the Wisconsin people that are falling into the category of the family office and family trusts, and for WIP and the people in that organization. So we, I think 25% or maybe even a little bit more, were very attracted to that. And that was a nice little kicker to help us with the speed and the timing with which we were able to close the initial close. So yeah, it's worth your time to look up that Qualified New Business Venture Program that WEDC is promoting.
And related to that particular subject, I'll just kind of put a little teaser out there that the CTC will be doing one of our quick chats in the coming month or so about that program with the guest from the WEDC. So look for that in the future. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So Andrea, tell us about how WIP fit into the Series A round, and how your involvement was similar or different than in the earlier round.
I guess I'd say it was relatively similar in to the extent that OnLume came to us and they had a term sheet from another investor, and had a good part of their round filled. We were just it was what we consider a follow-on investment to an existing portfolio company. They didn't necessarily have to jump through all the same kind of hoops as they would during an initial investment. So we just really supplemented the information that they'd provided us the first time around. Adam would come back and do a presentation and provide us with an update and talk about, one of the benefits of a company like OnLume is that it's a platform technology, and so the fact that they're already and continue to look at what those next products are that feed the pipeline for their commercial, future commercial launches is another exciting prospect for us. So hearing that stuff from Adam directly is always useful. And then what participated, I think we ended up pretty much doubling our existing investment in the Series A round.
Okay, and finally, Adam, from your perspective as a co-founder, what observations do you have about, I guess, the whole process, or the whole fundraising process, and what does it do to your level of confidence as a company?
Sure. So, I think one big difference was that we, with the Series A round, we sort of were in front of a lot of the questions, and as Jim mentioned, having the data room populated with diligence materials was something that I think reflected really well with investors, and I think it's not often done in seed rounds, but I don't really see any reason why it couldn't be. I think it's a really great approach to sort of having getting out in front of any questions that investors have, and I think that that was really helpful and helped to establish credibility that we had thought about all of these different aspects of the plan, whether it's the technical or financial or commercial considerations. So I think just in general, being out in front of the questions was a great approach. Personally, it was quite a bit different because I wasn't the one doing the initial pitch. Jim would do the pitch, and then myself and Christy were often in the calls to answer technical or research or clinical related questions, and I think it allowed us to have sort of a tag team approach that let us answer investor questions at any level of detail, and I think that made the conversations, those initial conversations and pitches with folks go very smoothly. And then in terms of level of confidence, we've got again an amazing team who has gone above and beyond these past several years through through all of the ups and downs of a startup, and everybody's really excited about what's coming next. So I think we're all confident that we've got the pieces in place to have a really exciting and successful few years ahead.
Great. Well, this is a good spot for any questions from the audience, and I don't see anything in the chat box, but if anyone has a question, you just want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it. I'll kind of pause for a moment. It's Christy, I see you there. Are you going to add something, or you want to say? Did you want to say something?
It's just been a pleasure to work with both Adam and Jim throughout all of these years, and seeing how our technology can grow from an idea into useful technology that has helped surgeons and patients alike.
Thanks. Any other questions from the group?
Hi, Brian. Can you hear me? This is Sue Wallace.
Yep, go for it.
Just a detailed question for your data room. I wonder, did you use a formal online tool that's built for data rooms for investors, or did you just structure something yourself?
We use Carta, which we also use for cap table management, and it's a great tool. And Jim, I know you have experience with other data room approaches, but I think Carta worked great, and pricing is reasonable, and the cap table management side is really streamlined as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I definitely endorse Carta for those reasons. I have used other virtual data rooms. Different companies have different pricing structures and different capabilities. Carta is fantastic, and you can have multiple data rooms depending on what audience you're getting in, and you can track everybody that's in there and track what they're looking at and how long they're looking at things. So yeah, I would endorse the Carta program, the platform.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it was also a detailed question related to the same subject. Was there one person from the company that was in charge of overseeing the quality of the information that was in the data room to make sure everything was what you wanted it to be?
We worked as a team on all that, and again, when we got feedback as we were vetting a story and getting out there and giving presentations, we were constantly improving it, and we were constantly improving The one section of the data room which we use are the questions that we garnered and our responses to those questions, so that new investors could see what others had asked and what our responses. So it was a constantly improving data room from which we got really great feedback and great compliments on. And I think I mentioned this up front, but there's no substitute for having that being very thorough. You just have to start somewhere and continue to work on it, because you're always going to have people that are needing further information, and those are the kind of people you want to have quick responses to. If they enjoyed your introduction to your story and it resonated and they're interested, you don't want them to slow down because you don't have some of the information available to them.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, this is Kevin with Pyran. I had a question for the OnLume team. I recognize Adam's strategy of kind of cultivating the Wisconsin investor group, with the entrepreneur conference, governor's contest. I'm just curious what your main strategy is for reaching out more nationally to meet new venture capital groups. I know there's kind of these speed dating events. There's these conferences you can pay $1,000 for to pitch. I'm just curious what your recommendations are.
Yeah, we didn't limit ourselves, and as stated, we went down parallel paths with different profiles, and that included in each profile people outside Wisconsin. Generally speaking, I think it is important to have some good support and good investors that are within driving distance of the company. But that does not mean it has to be the majority investors. And we were nurturing all those different profiles locally and nationally, and that was very helpful. When it got down to it, we ended up choosing what we had on our plate with these family offices, and it turned out to be a really great decision. Number one, it was successful, and it was successful in the midst of the pandemic. And as you'll notice, if you look at some of these sites like PitchBook, there have been very few Series A med tech announcements over the last 6 months. A lot of the VCs were holding some dry powder for their portfolio companies. But we didn't exclude nationally. It just so happens that a big batch of our investors came out of the woodwork in Wisconsin, and we love that. Now, as far as going forward, you never start too early in nurturing financing for your next round. And certainly we are going to be cognizant of that, including with the VC community, including with the national VC community that are commonly investing in the early stage medtech surgical innovation field. So yeah, that's another message that I learned a while back, is you never contact some of these potential partners and potential investors too early. Getting those relationships started is very important.
Yeah.
Along those lines, oh, sorry. I was just going to ask along those lines, how do you approach creating that initial list of target venture capital groups in your space? Is it skimming through PitchBook for hours, finding people that invested in similar companies? Do you have any recommendations along those lines?
Yeah, well, you start with the ones that you know from past lives, and they're on the radar a lot at these conferences. The conferences you mentioned, all of which are continued on during the pandemic, but in a virtual manner. Some of those cost money, some of those not so much money, but attending those, even before you're ready with your pitch, attending those and understanding who some of the players are that have a big pile of their fund yet to be invested. And you can get a lot of the information on PitchBook also. Being active in that even before you're ready to reach out for these one-on-ones, to understand who's active at all these conferences, the med tech conferences specifically, and that'll give you an idea of this. Lots of groups you want to reach out to. It'll also you can usually, with a little bit of legwork, find out what their sweet spot is, whether it's seed, Series A, Series B, et cetera. What their normal check size is, whether they want to lead, whether they want to be a secondary investor, things like that you can readily find with a little bit of legwork.
Yeah, and I want to just follow on to some of Jim's points quickly. We have attended some of those conferences, like it's more medtech focused, but like Resi and Bio, and well, none of those ended up in investor hits, but we had the introductions to those investors that might be that we now have a point of contact with, and we have baseline sort of introduction already in place when we go to raise a future funding round, a Series B, for example. So I think I think they're worthwhile, but you really get out what you put in, because you have to have personalized messages to those that you request, the investors you request meetings with, and you do have to do some background research on Crunchbase or PitchBook to get a handle on who's worth reaching out to. But those are, I think, definitely viable paths for getting introductions to national VCs. And then in terms of the vetting of potential VCs, we actually also worked with, we did a small project with WeSolve, which is a nonprofit on campus that has graduate students and postdocs do consulting work that help put together a list and do some of the sort of discovery and sort of data population of an investor list. So that was I think a pretty cost-effective way of pulling together a large list of folks to reach out to as well.
Thank you for those answers. I appreciate it.
Okay, so we're down to the end here. We have just enough time for me to circle back to each of the panelists and ask, do you have one piece of advice or one words of wisdom or one summary comment that that each of you wants to share? And I will start. I'll start with you, Adam, since you appear on the left on my screen.
Sure, as good a reason as any. Yeah. So yeah, I think that in general, I think asking for advice is a piece of advice. It can often feel as an entrepreneur you're kind of on an island, and your challenges are unique to you and your field and your space. But there are so many parallels between even in totally different fields that I think it's good to talk to other entrepreneurs about their experiences and ask for advice from investors. I've heard it said that if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. But I think it is important to really think of investors as people, and just ask for them that ask for advice from them as to what things they would want to hear, or what things they would want to understand better from what you're communicating to them. So just yeah, be coachable and accept feedback, and be flexible, and incorporate advice. So.
And Jim, how about you?
Yeah, I wrote down a couple notes, might be repetitive, but always tie the funding to the specific milestones. That's what everyone wants to know. What funding over what timing is going to achieve what? And I think we did a good job of being very specific on that. Be very thorough in your data room support. It's also, I think it's important to have runway and a cushion while you're doing your financing. It makes it that much harder if you have a deadline that's next week that you need the funding in by. I think you always look ahead that you're going to need that cushion and runway, because it always takes a little bit longer than you need. And adding on to your other questions, Kevin, I think trying to get a warm introduction really helps, no matter what profile of investor you're talking with. Cold calls are difficult this day and age, but again, with a little bit of legwork, I think you can achieve a warm introduction, and that really helps. So yeah, and circling back to the first point, being specific on the timing, the capital needed, the dependencies on achieving these milestones, and what runway you're going to have at the end of this funding, all that is music to the ears of people that are considering to invest. And good luck to everybody.
And that's a good lead in to Andrea with your comments.
So far, suggestions are really great. I guess I would say be a genuine person. I think that coming in and being a player doesn't necessarily resonate with some of the early stage investors. I also think that Adam and OnLume and Adam and Jim and the company did a great job balancing non-dilutive funding. And so to be sure that you're exploring all opportunities for non-dilutive funding, because investors really like to see that if it's available for your industry. Also be cognizant of what your cap table looks like. Stringing together a bunch of sequential notes because you're trying to hit some specific milestone that's going to be an inflection point for your valuation. Sounds like a good story until you keep missing that milestone and you keep getting more and more notes on your cap table, and it ends up being very messy when you get to an equity round. So be realistic on the amount of funding that you're going to need. I think Jim made a good point of making sure you have enough, because you don't want to be constantly scrambling for capital. And even if it means giving up some of that valuation that you think that you deserve at that next milestone, having that money in the pocket is better than not having it. So be realistic about the time frame that it's really going to take to get there.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, OnLume team. Jim, Adam, Christy, thanks. Andrea, thank you very much for being on the panel. I think I found it very useful. And again, to the audience, we'll be recording this and sharing this as well. And we'll see you all again.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Thanks for including me.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.